Hello everyone and welcome to another Go Go Muffin video. Before we dive in here, make sure you hit that subscribe button and notification bell and drop a like on the video too if you're enjoying the content. Don't forget to join our Discord server as well if you're not already there. The link is in the description down below. We've also activated our channel membership which comes with all kinds of perks, so check that out if you're interested in joining. And speaking of channel membership, I do want to take a moment to give a special shout out to our current members. Thanks to all of you, and I hope you're enjoying the benefits. And finally, a reminder that all comments on every video will be automatically entered into our weekly giveaways, and winners will be randomly selected and announced every Monday. So good luck, and let's get started. So we have here another artifact video. Specifically, this will be our second video in our regional artifact tier list series. Now we've already done the Dark Moon Forest region, and today we'll be looking at the second artifact region that unlocks in the game, which is the ATRA Volcano region. A reminder that the reason we're approaching this tier list series is because of the fact that unlike many other systems in the game, there is no way to reset the decisions you make in artifacts. Every resource you use, every choice you make is permanent. And because of that, knowing and understanding what those best choices are can save you a lot of resources and optimize your progression through the system. Now, the ATRA Volcano region has quite a few more artifacts than the Dark Moon Forest region, as there are 10 rares, 15 epics, and a whopping 14 legendaries, which is significantly more than Dark Moon was, which only had 6 legendaries. So, and similar to the Dark Moon region, this will not be a case again of higher rarity automatically equals better either. Now, a reminder, because of the different stat requirements, we're going to be doing two separate tier lists in this video, one for DPS and one for tanks. And I don't include healers here because they just share a lot of the DPS stats. But for healers, you're basically going to want to prioritize attack and healing percentage whenever you see them above DPS. But for the rest, you follow the DPS's order of artifacts in the tier list. So with all of that said, we can go ahead and start the process here, and we're going to be starting with the rares. So let's kick things off with the first rare here, Memories of Dragon Bones. And we are starting with a pretty good artifact when it comes to DPS. This is actually going to be a very valuable stat to get Determination, which is one of your main offensive increasing stats. Alongside crit is very important and very important to balance. So as a result, we're going to go ahead and place this right into the A tier, as it is going to have a big impact on our DPS output and allow us to balance our stats more easily. Next up, we have the Gathering of Sages, which increases endurance. Now, endurance I would rank for DPS alongside evasion. It's a pretty good stat to get. You don't have to unnecessarily chase it, but because it's simply a percentage decrease of the damage you take, it is quite useful with evasion, and as such, I wouldn't put this in the D tier with other defensive stats. I would put this in the C tier. So not terrible, but not a top priority as a DPS, as it doesn't really increase your DPS, it just gives you a bit more survivability. Next up, we have Transparent Feather Garment, which gives Tenacity. And Tenacity, as you lose your HP, the lower your HP, the higher your damage resistance. Not that useful for DPS, and ultimately going to end up in the D tier along with most other defensive stats. Next up, we have the Shepherd's Ring, which increases Mastery. Now, Mastery is another of those very important DPS increasing stats that's going to make its way into a high tier here because of the fact that Mastery, Determination, Crit, and Haste are all very important for DPS, and so this is going to be another A tier contender. Next up, we have the Moth Shield. The Moth Shield increases HP, which is really not that important to prioritize as a DPS. As such, this is going to follow suit in the D tier. After Moth Shield, we have the Night Order Medal. Now, this is an increase in attack, a quite nice increase in attack here, but as attack is less important for DPS than Haste, Mastery, Determination, and Crit, we're going to go ahead and put this into the B tier. Next, we have the Blue Wisp. Blue Wisp is another HP artifact. We've already had one HP artifact. We know where this is going to end up. It's going to be D tier for DPS. Then we have the Love Potion, which is another attack increasing artifact. since we've already had one, we know where to put it. It's going to end up in the B tier. Friendship Spray. The Friendship Spray is going to increase your defense. This is, again, not that important for DPS, and as such, this is going to end up in the D tier. And finally, we have the Feathered Priest Tome, which is another defense increasing artifact, and not that important for DPS. As such, it's also going to be in D tier. And that's all of our rares in record-breaking time. Now let's transition to the epics, of which there are a few more in this region. Now, in the Dark Moon Forest region, there were certain artifacts that increased your attack percentage when you were fighting in certain regions. Now, ATRA Volcano has some similar artifacts, but instead of increasing your attack in regions, you're increasing your attack against certain enemy types. Now, if you didn't know, when you're fighting enemies, you have two different things that come into consideration. Number one is the region, and number two is the creature type. And you have both of those in artifacts, which allow you to increase your attack whenever you're fighting in number one, the region, and number two, against that particular enemy type. So as such, we're going to give this somewhat similar treatment to what we gave the region, since this is conditional DPS increase, and outside of fighting creature enemies, you're not going to see any gains. So I wouldn't rank this as highly, for example, as some straight up flat DPS increasing artifact, but it's still very useful and shouldn't be ignored completely. So as such, we're going to be putting most of these increasing attack against certain enemies into the B tier for DPS. So Pioneer's Book, B tier. Call of the Frost Whispers, fighting against mechanical enemies, increase attack. This is also B tier. Words of the High One, when fighting humanoid enemies, increase attack. B tier. Next up, we have Disarming Gauntlet. Now, Disarming Gauntlet increases block relative to the number of monsters you defeated. Block is a pretty low priority stat when it comes to DPS, as it is purely a defensive stat. However, as this is an epic, which does mean this has a bond attached to it, this is going to end up in the C tier purely because of the fact that it activates a bond, not because the stat itself is of any use to DPS. Next, we have the Wyvern Rubbing, which increases attack against demon enemies. Again, this is going to be B tier. Then we have the Hearth Omen, the same against elemental enemies. This is going to be B tier. Then we have the Rovanian Code. This is going to increase your HP. Not, again, a defensive stat. Normally this would be D tier, but this is going to get bumped up to C tier purely because of the fact that it activates a bond. Sword of Calamity, increase your evasion based on number of elites defeated. Evasion, like I've said, alongside endurance, relatively better for DPS as far as defensive stats go, but still not a huge priority. As such, this is going to end up in C tier. Then we have the Elemental Cannon, which is going to increase your crit by quite a good amount, 162 crit. As such, believe it or not, this epic is going to make its way all the way to S tier. We've already established that the Mastery, Determination, Crit, and Haste are going to be very good, and as a result, because of the fact this is a very high priority stat, plus it activates a bond, this is an easy S tier for this epic here. After Elemental Cannon, we have the Poet's Verses. In the main journey, every 1,000 bosses increases your defense. Defense, once again, not that important for DPS, but it activates a bond, so it's going to end up in the C tier. Then we have the Masquerade Waltz. For every 100,000 monsters defeated, increase HP. Once again, C tier because it's a low priority defensive stat, but it activates a bond. Old Tales of the Rhine. Defense. I think we know the drill by now. Low priority for DPS, activates a bond, C tier. Normally these would be in the D tier if they were rare, but because of the fact that they activate bonds, they're going to make their way to the C tier. Next up, we have the Queen's March. In the main journey, for every 2,000 elites defeated, we're going to have an increase in attack. And it's quite a nice increase in attack, so a little bit better than the B tier attack increasing rares. So as a result, we're going to put this into the A tier. Then we have the Book of Mercy, another attack increasing one like the previous one. This is going to make its way to the A tier because it's a nice DPS increase. And finally we have the Reed Spear, and that is another very, very good artifact. As you can see here, you get additional haste per login day up to a limit, and this is a lot of haste. As a result, this epic is going to make its way all the way to the S tier, as this is a very useful artifact for DPS. And finally, we are at the legendary tier. There's going to be 14 legendaries here, and let's take a look at all of these and see how these rank. So first off, we have the Black Tortoise Seal, which gives a huge amount of block. I'm sure you can imagine where this is going to rank for tanks, but for DPS, it's not that useful. As such, this is going to end up in the C tier. Next, we have the Praise Treaties, which is a beautiful, beautiful artifact. Passive skill damage plus a large percentage, and passive healing effect as well. Now, this type of artifact that increases your skill specific type damage is very, very rare and very, very limited. As such, this is a very highly ranked artifact. This is an easy S tier. In the previous region in Darkmoon Forest, we had 2 artifacts that increased our tactical skill damage, and here we have an artifact and presumably one more increasing our passive skill damage and healing, of course. So very, very nice. There are some classes that deal significant damage from their passives, so this would be your bread and butter. Very, very nice artifact. Next up, we have Jokes of the God of Mischief, which increases defense. Now, even though this is a legendary, it's not going to have any additional value to DPS, so it's going to end up in the C tier. Then we have Twisted Shadow, which is a large increase to attack. As a result, because it is quite a big increase in attack, this is actually going to end up in the S tier, as this significantly increases your DPS. Then we have Weaver's Echo, which is a large HP increase. Again, not that important, so this is going to end up in C tier for DPS. Then we have the Golden Chess King. Golden Chess King increases a massive amount of determination for every 2 login days. As a result, this is an easy S right here next to the other legendaries. Very, very nice. Huge increase in determination. That's going to contribute nicely to our overall DPS output. Then we have Skadi's Movement, which is again a passive skill increasing artifact. As you can see here, very, very nice artifact. Healing effect and damage both increased. We're going to put this right next to Praise Treaties up at the top here at S tier. Very, very nice artifact. Next we have Golden Chess Rook, which increases endurance. Once again, I've established endurance as being relatively good for DPS, but not like the best thing in the world, so this is going to end up in the C tier. Then we have, I lost my track here, White Tiger Seal. White Tiger Seal is a absolute gargantuan increase in crit. Look at mine at 504 crit. Yes, it is 5-star and +9, but that is a huge amount of crit. And you should guess exactly where this goes. You're right. This is an easy S tier. So that is an absolutely significant artifact. So yeah, that is a real... To get that much crit from one artifact is insane. That's 500 flat stats. That's the same as a move, a single Melamon move at that point. Next up, we have the Moonsong. Moonsong increases your attack while fighting draconic enemies. We know what are draconic enemies. This is the dragon. We've established that the dragon's pretty important. It's your daily resources from doing dragon's bounties. So this is going to rank higher than the other specific monster increasing artifacts. This is going to end up in the top of A tier, as the more dragon damage you do, the more rewards you get. So very important to increase your dragon damage more so than the other enemy types, which you'll mostly find in other game modes such as trials and etc., rifts and so on. Next up, we have the Golden Chess Queen, which is another huge increase in mastery. Main story journey, 100,000 monsters defeated increases your mastery. This is really nice. A lot of mastery. This is going to be another S tier. Now, this is a lot of S tiers, but there are a lot of very good artifacts for DPS in this region. So that's why we have so many in the S tier. They're just really a huge priority of really good artifacts. Now, here we have a large amount of tenacity, But as I've established, tenacity is not such a huge priority for DPS, but it is a legendary. It is going to end up in the C tier. We are going to have our first overflow here to another level here of the C tier. And then the final two are going to be the Vermilion Birdseal, which increases evasion. By now you should know where this is going to end up if you've been following the trend. This is going to be in C tier as it is going to be lower priority, but it is a legendary. It activates a bond, but it's defensive stats and not something we prioritize. And finally, last but definitely not least, we have a sick haste increasing artifact. This is another easy S tier. So there you have it. This is the complete DPS tier list for the AETRA Volcano region. This is going to be the order of which you prioritize not just your resonance, but also how you're going to be spending your amber. Now, when you have amber, you might have a lot of dupes of certain artifacts, but it might not be worth spending the amber on those artifacts if they're somewhat lower down on the tier list. And the higher ones on the tier list are worth spending the amber on right away because these are going to have direct and significant impacts on your overall DPS. So with all of that done, now it's time for us to transition over to the tank artifact. So bear with me 1 second. We're going to transition right now. Okay, and now we're going to be doing the same again for tanks. Now, tanks do have a different priority for artifacts, and this is specifically for tanks, not just general sword bearers. If you're a DPS focused sword bearer, you are going to, of course, just follow the DPS priority tier list, but this is specifically for tanks. So with that in mind, let's start making the list and go through what the top priorities are for tanks. Starting with, again, the rares, Memories of the Dragon Bone, increases determination. This is going to be not that important for tanking, but better than flat attack. As a result, this ends up in the C tier, as it's not totally useless, but not that great for increasing your survivability. Gathering of the Sages increases your endurance. Endurance is a very, very important defensive ability. I would say, I think that endurance is underrated. When you read tank guides, when you read all the class information and people's discussions, people severely underrate the importance of endurance. Now, obviously, you're not going to prioritize it above other great stats like block, for example, in defense, but it is still worth considering alongside those stats. So as such, I'm actually going to put this into the A tier for tanks because I think endurance is very important and often overlooked. Next, we have Transparent Feather Garment, which increases your tenacity. As we've established, tenacity is a pretty good stat for tanking, but not the best thing in the world. As a result, this is going to end up in the B tier, usually alongside HP and priority for tanks. Then we have the Shepherd's Ring. The Shepherd's Ring is increasing mastery. Now, this doesn't increase our tanking at all, but it is slightly better than flat attack, so this is going to end up in the C tier. Then we have the Moth Shield. The Moth Shield increases HP, and this is pretty good for tanks, not the best in the world, so this is going to end up next to the Tenacity one in the B tier. Then we have the Night Order Medal, which is a flat attack increase, is about as useless as it gets for tanking, so this is going to end up in the D tier. Then we have the Blue Wisp, which increases your HP. Like the other, this is going to end up in the B tier as it's pretty good for tanking. Then we have the Love Potion, which is another flat attack increase. This is going to follow the Night Order Medal in the D tier. Then we have Friendship Spray. Friendship Spray increases our defense. This is a very good stat for tanks. It is a priority to get as much defense as you can. As such, we're going to go ahead and put this up into the A tier for tanks. And finally, we have the Feathered Priest Tome, which is another defense one, which is going to follow suit also in the A tier. And just like that, we've blasted through all our rares. Now we can look at the epics and see how they rank for tanks. So first off, we have the Pioneer Book. Now, this is increasing creature DPS, your DPS against specific enemies. This is pretty low priority when it comes to tank. As such, we're going to go ahead and slap all of these fighting against specific enemy types into the D tier because you just don't need to worry about these as a tank too much. So Call of the Frost Whisperer, D tier. Humanoid enemies attack, D tier. Disarming Gauntlet is not one of those. So Disarming Gauntlet is increasing your block based on your defeated monsters in the main journey, and block is a very, very good stat for tanks. As a result, this is going to end up in the S tier, as block is a high priority stat that you need to chase for tanks. Plus, this is an epic, so it gives more stats and additionally activates a bond. So very, very good. Next, we have Wyvern Rubbing. This is going to follow in the D tier, as it is an attack increasing against demon enemies. Then we have Hearth Omen, increases attack against elemental enemies, another D tier for tanks. Then we have Ravanian Code, which is a larger increase into HP. This is pretty good. It is better than the rares, obviously, so this is going to end up in the A tier. Not S tier, because HP is less important than block and defense, for example, but still pretty good. Then after that, we have the Sword of Calamity, which increases your evasion. Evasion, a pretty good stat for tanks, but not like a top priority stat. You would prioritize evasion after defense and block and HP and endurance, but we're going to put it in the B tier, as there's certainly nothing wrong with it, and you would definitely go after it. Next, we have the Elemental Cannon, which is increasing our crit. Again, this is going to be in the C tier here, as it's not particularly useful for tanking, but it's still nice to have a bit of crit and determination and mastery and haste, just to have a little bit of offensive output. So after that, we have the Poet's Verses. The Poet's Verses increases your defense by a rather large amount based on bosses defeated. As a result, this is going to end up solidly in the S tier. Defense, another very important stat, and a large amount of it, easy S tier artifact here. Masquerade Waltz increases a pretty large amount of HP, but again, HP is not quite as important as the other defensive stats, so this is going to end up in the A tier. Then we have Old Tales of Rhine, which is just straight up a flat defense increase. This is going to follow suit into the S tier, another nice tanking artifact. Then our final three, we have the Kreen's Marchwing, increases attack here. It is an epic which does activate a bond, so this is going to make it to the C tier as pretty low priority. Then we have the Book of Mercy, again an attack increasing one, which is going to follow suit in the C tier, purely because they activate bonds that can increase your defense slightly. And finally, the Reed Spear, which increases haste. This is going to end up also in the C tier, but at a higher point in the C tier, excuse me, wrong one here. At a higher point in the C tier, because haste is pretty useful for tanks in some aspects. So that's all the rares and epics done, and now we have our 14 legendaries to go through. Let's see where these are going to end up for tanks. So first off, we have the Black Tortoise Seal, which is the motherlode. Take a look at this baby. We have a 400 plus block increasing artifact. This is an absolute beast of an artifact, right to S tier, top of S tier. This is your bread and butter for tanking. This is going to absolutely huge block increase here. I mean, you'll love to see it. This is the same as having another bonus block move from your Melamon equipped. So very, very nice artifact. Next, we have the Praise Treaties, which is increasing your passive skill damage and passive skill healing. Now, interestingly enough, tanks do in fact have a passive skill that heals them, a self-healing passive skill. As a result, this artifact is not totally useless for tanks. It can increase your self-healing and a little bit of your survivability. As such, this is not going to be like ultra top priority, but it is going to sneak its way, despite being a mostly DPS and healing focused artifact, it's going to sneak its way up into the B tier here because of the fact that you can increase your self-healing because of your self-healing passive that you would run. Next up, we have Jokes of the God of Mischief, which is a large increase in defense. So this is very, very nice alongside the other Black Tortoise Seal. Huge defense increase. This is going to make its way to S tier for sure. That's very, very nice. This is supposed to be over here, by the way. Next up, we have the Twisted Shadow, which increases attack by a large amount, but like the other offensive abilities, it's simply going to end up in C tier because it's not a huge priority. Weaver's Echo, a very large increase in HP. And because of this, Weaver's Echo is going to make it all the way to the S tier, but at the lower end of the S tier here, because it is a large HP increase, but HP again, not mega priority compared to some of the other defensive stats. So, up next we have the Golden Chest King, which is a large increase to Determination. Determination doesn't increase our defensive abilities. We're going to put that in C tier as it's still going to activate a bond for us. Next we have the Scotty's Movement, which is also a passive skill healing effect increase. Pretty useful for tanks, like I said. Alongside the other, this is going to make it to B tier, at the top of B tier, as a pretty good one to increase your self-healing, but again, a little bit niche. A little niche, but still pretty good. Then we have the Golden Chest Rook, which is a pretty large increase in endurance. Now, endurance, like I've said, is a very underrated stat, and I find it to be very, very good. As a result, this is going to make it all the way to the S tier, as it is a legendary and it does offer a good amount of endurance. And finally, we have our... Oh, not finally, sorry, we have 2 more layers here. And then we have White Tiger Seal, which is a large increase to crit. Crit, as we know, is not a super huge priority for tanks. This is going to make it to the C tier. Then we have the Moon Song, which is increasing our attack against dragon enemies. This is going to end up in the C tier because it is the dragon. It is nice to do a tiny bit more damage, but it's not a huge priority for tanks. Then we have the Golden Chest Queen, which increases mastery. This is going to be another C tier. And then finally, we have the top 3, which is going to be, not top 3, but the top 3 rows. We have the Golden Chest Knight, which increases a huge amount of tenacity. And while tenacity, like I said, is not necessarily the ultimate stat you'd be chasing, it's still a large amount of tenacity, but this is going to make it right to the top of A tier. Not quite to S tier, but the top of A tier as a very good artifact, but not best of the best, since you chase tenacity after defense and after your block, for example, and endurance. So the final 2 here, the Vermilion Bird Seal, a huge amount of evasion here. Again, evasion is going to be one of your lesser prioritized defensive stats. It's going to be another top of A tier, just below the tenacity here. 2 very good artifacts, don't get me wrong, but less priority than those in S tier. And finally, we have the Azure Dragon Seal, which increases haste. Again, this is going to make it to the C tier here. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. That is the complete tier list for AETRA Volcano, both for DPS, first off, and for tanks. And this, what you're looking at now, is the best order of priority for tanks for AETRA Volcano region. So there you have it. Hopefully you're finding this artifact tier list series helpful, and it allows you to make more informed decision as to why you should be spending your resources and where you should be spending them. So there you have it. Thanks for watching, everyone. Take care, and I will see you in the next video. Bye now.